Okay, well today, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about the Article 5 Convention Lobby Unmasked. Now, when I was a little bit smaller, a little bit younger, we had a show we called Scooby-Doo. Hopefully many of you remember that. And at the end, it was often a thing where they would take the mask off the villain and see who it was. And he would say, well, if it wouldn't have been for you meddling kids, I would have gotten away with it. Something like that, right? And so today we're going to have a little fun and talk about some people that are, needing to be unmasked and their tactics and how they go about things and how we can recognize a little bit of the deception that's going on. And we're going to focus on what's often called the Article 5 Convention, but there's other names it goes under as well. Okay, there we go. Now, we as Americans, we'll just start off with this. We basically, by living here or being born here, we kind of hit the jackpot. We were born into probably the freest, I would say, most prosperous society in the history of the world. And of course, that's something that's pretty valuable. We should value it. And much of that is due to the foundation and government organization. And that's laid out in the Constitution. It's fairly brief compared to other constitutions in the world, but it's probably the longest lasting. There's debate about that Constitution in the history of the world. But I thought I'd bring up a slide from somebody that can provide some wisdom. This is a man named Patrick Henry. You probably remember him from the speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." And when the Constitution was being debated as to whether the state of Virginia would ratify, he said this. He said, "Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel." So the public liberty, one of the things that can kind of represent that would be the Constitution. So if somebody is wanting to change the Constitution, his advice to us was, it's not that we should never change the Constitution, but we should be very careful when somebody entertains that as an idea. We should look at them with, look at that idea with a little bit of suspicion rather than just jumping right into it. Okay. Now, I'll just give a little bit of an overview of the process of amending the U.S. Constitution. It's in Article 5, or the 5th article, or you might say part of the U.S. Constitution, the original Constitution. It's very brief. It's one long sentence. And there's two ways to do that. The first way is that we've always done. 2/3 of the states, the first way is actually 2/3 of Congress, both the House and the Senate. They propose an amendment, and then it goes to the states, whether it's the state legislatures or a special ratifying conventions in each state, which happen once, to decide if that becomes part of the U.S. Constitution. And so that's the way we've always amended the U.S. Constitution. But the Article 5 Convention process for changing the U.S. Constitution is a little bit different. You start with 2/3 of each of the states, so 34 out of 50 states would need to pass a special application or request to Congress to call a convention. And the special convention would be for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And then it would go, any proposed amendments would go to the states, either the legislatures or state special state ratifying conventions in each state, depending on what Congress chooses, to decide whether they become part of the U.S. Constitution. So that's a way we've never done before. And there's, I think, good reason for that. If you look at Article 5, you'll see that it's very bare bones, and there are many unanswered questions as to how that would actually play out. So that's been a subject of debate for many, many years as to what that would mean. One of the questions is, do they have to be all for the same subject? because state legislatures will say, well, we'd like to have a convention to propose this or that amendment to the US Constitution. But does that mean that they all have to be for that type of amendment to trigger a convention, or can they be for all kinds of various topics? Well, over the years, Congress has filled in the blanks where the Constitution is silent on that question. And up till at least today, they've said they need to be on the same subject. So that's just one example of a number of questions that are just dealt with where the Constitution just is silent, unclear, sometimes vague. Much of the Constitution is pretty clear, but there are some parts where sometimes you feel like, oh, this could have been fleshed out a little better. So I'm going to focus on 4 different tactics of deception. There's some people that are pushing for a convention under Article 5 for proposing amendments and, of course, for changing the Constitution through that process. The first one is false but flattering assurances. The second is semantics, so playing with words. Third is embracing what they have previously denied. And then the fourth one is compelling but false narrative, a story that sounds great, but it's not real based in facts. Now, in a nutshell, here is the most common way that the idea of a sometimes called a constitutional convention, Article 5 convention, we'll get into those various terms, how it's sold to people. They'll say something like, well, the federal government is out of control. And they'll list a number of different things that the federal government is doing. And to most people that describe themselves as conservatives, they'll say, well, yeah, I agree with you. The federal government has too much power. It's abusing its power. It's usurping its power, all those different things. But then they come and say, well, here's the solution that we propose. We need to change the Constitution through the amendments process and through the convention way of doing it. And they'll say convention is the only way of doing it. And this is what the founders gave us for a situation like that. And besides, you should trust us because we're the experts and we've really studied this. Now, they give assurances. For example, they'll say, well, it'll be strictly limited to this or that subject or this or that amendment being proposed. And the applications have to be the same wording or very similar. And that's how we ensure that it doesn't go off in some tangent. That nobody wants what they call a runaway convention, or a convention that proposes amendments that nobody intended from the outset. And then they, depending on their audience, they'll imply that this is a conservative or progressive cause. Now, many people I've found when I give this presentation, they've heard a lot of the talking points from various groups on the conservative side, and it gives them the impression that there are no progressives, leftists, Marxists, liberals pushing for a convention. That's actually not the case. So we'll get into that a little bit. But probably for the conservatives, the most appealing types of ideas for changing the US Constitution nowadays is the balanced budget amendment idea and also the term limits idea. Okay, for the progressives, it's something like, well, we need to limit the campaign finance, have changes with that, and empower the government to have publicly funded elections and things like that. So that's kind of, you might say, a red meat for the progressive cause. But a number of years ago, I would say about starting in 2010, 2011, one of the groups on the conservative side that went around and got a good number of legislatures to apply for a convention, and some of them, you might say, reapplying after they rescinded their applications, was a group called the Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force. And they had various publications. Here's from one of them, that one of their spokesmen was a man named Bill Fruth. He said, in order to convene a convention for proposing a balanced budget amendment, 34 states, 2/3, need to pass a resolution for this subject. The resolutions do not have to be the same in their wording, but only need to state the convention is limited to considering a balanced budget amendment. And so a lot of legislators picked that up, and they used that as their kind of one of their talking points. So just, I could give you many examples, but here's just one from Utah.
These occur only one at a time. Congress compiles them one at a time. This is the Balanced Budget Amendment Convention resolution. There are 25 others of them. They will count those up when they're 34. That will be the convention that is called. It will not be for any other purpose.
So states like Utah, for example, this is in 2015 when they passed this type of resolution for an amendments convention, or a convention for proposing amendments, whatever you want to call it. And the legislators believed this talking point, and they said, well, if it's limited to one thing, then I can vote for it, but I would never vote for an open-ended convention. And I think nowadays, if you talk with just about anybody, very few people would say, yeah, I want something that's just, we can change the Constitution any way we want. Okay, here's another claim they made, very common. They said, a convention for proposing amendments is not a constitutional convention. It never should be called such. There is no provision in our Constitution for such an assembly. Now, for those involved in this, subject for a number of years, that sounded a bit surprising, because actually, previous to that, I'll get to this a little later, but the groups pushing for a convention for a balanced budget amendment, they openly said, we want a constitutional convention. Back in the 70s and 80s, that's what they said. But let's take a look at this term constitutional convention, because nowadays, if you talk with somebody about that, they'll vehemently say, this is not a constitutional convention that we want. We want a convention of the states. Well, they often don't seem to be too pleased when you bring up Black's Law Dictionary, which is the most commonly used law dictionary in the United States in the legal field. And what does it say about the term constitutional convention? It's a duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people or of a state or nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending its constitution. Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution provides that a constitutional convention may be called on application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. Well, I've actually shared that with people, and some of them are so convinced they trust whatever spokesman might be pushing for a convention that they just they disregard Black's Law Dictionary. It's kind of amazing to see that. They'll say something like, well, I trust Mark Meckler. Some of you might know him. He's the president, CEO, and co-founder of Convention of States Project. So back in 2013, he was going around. This is from a group called ALEC, talking it more in private to state legislators, pushing for the idea of a convention. So I'd like to share kind of their own words so you can see and hear it.
If you stand up and put your career on the line to support a call for a constitutional convention, you need to know that there's an army behind you. You deserve that, and you need to know it if you're going to stand strong. And we're going to make sure that that army is there for you.
All right, so there's Mark Meckler calling it a constitutional convention. Doesn't have any problem doing that in private. Now, if you ask him in public, he'll insist, of course, that it's not a constitutional convention. It's a convention of states, and even named his organization the Convention of States Project. Okay, now it can be a little confusing going through these different terms, but I'll simplify it in this way. Just about any application, any resolution from a legislature that's saying, you know what, we want a convention for proposing amendments. It'll have this phrase that says, pursuant to Article 5 of the US Constitution. So I like the term actually Article 5 convention, because it points to where the power, where the authority for changing the US Constitution comes from in this particular case. It's from the 5th article of the US Constitution. So the next question is, well, are there any limits that the founders provided for us on this subject? Well, yes, there are, in a sense. But first, it's described as a convention for proposing amendments. Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. That's all it says. It doesn't say just one amendment, doesn't say limited to certain subjects, anything like that. That's what Congress has power to call, is a convention for proposing amendments. Now, there are actually two types of amendments that are specifically prohibited from being proposed and or ratified and added to the US Constitution under the authority of Article 5. One has to do with slavery, and that expired in 1808. So that's really not applicable to today. But the second is no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the US Senate. And one could argue that that actually has been violated through the 17th Amendment, where no longer the state legislatures choose the US senators. So that's a thing for debate for many years, but that's the only thing that it says. Okay, so some of you might be wondering, why is all this hubbub about what we call it? Well, okay. Back in the 1970s, especially, there were groups pushing for what they called a constitutional convention. And many state legislatures, such as Wyoming, Utah, South Dakota, Oklahoma, they passed resolutions petitioning Congress to call a convention for proposing a balanced budget amendment, a constitutional convention, as they called it in those resolutions. So in the early 80s, people that were pushing for a convention for this purpose, they were pretty excited. They got 32 states. So they said, well, we only need 2 more states to get to a convention. But then they ran into kind of a roadblock. In the 80s, 90s, 2000s, state after state started rescinding their applications for such a convention. And they realized the legislatures said, you know, we don't want to put the whole Constitution on the table. They realized that a constitutional convention doesn't have any limits about what it can be, what it can consider. And we really value the US Constitution. So they started rescinding. And the people that are pushing for a convention, of course, didn't like that. So, well, what do we do about this? Well, it was pretty simple. It was kind of like the time when they started selling prunes as dried plums. Now, they decided we're going to call a convention of states. And that's what they did. They said, we're not pushing a constitutional convention. Nobody wants a constitutional convention. We want a convention of states. That's totally different. And some states bought that. And some states reapplied for a convention. Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, other states. But at the same time, so they started this process in about 2011, 2010. But starting in about 2015, 2016, you had states rescinding their applications. And so you can see that overall in this time period, they weren't picking up any new states. And that led one of the advocates to just frankly say the last 2 years have seen a plateauing in our efforts. So they said, what are we going to do about that? Among themselves, they discussed, and they came up with a plan. And this is from a blog that is kind of for those concerned about this issue, for pushing an Article 5 convention. And some of them mentioned, they said, the comprehensive strategy of the ACF, the American Constitution Foundation, needs to be seriously considered and funded in planning to make application to the Congress to call a general COS. I'll break that down a little bit. You probably haven't heard of the ACF. I'll go into who they are. But a general COS, which is Convention of States, Article 5 convention, same thing. General meaning not limited in any subject. Well, why would they do that? That's kind of an interesting thing. And did this pick up adherence? Was it brushed off as, you know, that's not a serious idea for promoting? Here's what the American Constitution Foundation is about. Very simply, they say our goal is to facilitate the first ever Article 5 General Convention in American history. They're very open about their goal. They want to change the Constitution, period. Now, in this blog, they went on to say, in concert with the axiom, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, it makes good sense to use whatever qualifying COS applications are available to have a COS convened as soon as possible. Now, you might remember that the assurance in the past had been that you had to have 34 applications for a convention for the same subject or the same amendment. And now they're saying, you know what? Let's throw anything at the wall and see what sticks to finally get Congress to call this convention. Just any way we can. Doesn't matter if these things are related in subject or not for what we want to see come out of a convention. They said we should work with other additional states if necessary to remove limiting language from an existing application, or pass a new application for an Article 5 General Convention to attain the 34 applications needed to trigger the convention. So you see their focus is changing to just trigger the convention. But the last part was pretty revealing. They said, Convention of States project applications are the closest to a general application. So they had kind of a problem, right? How do we convince state legislators who have told us many times that they're not wanting to put everything in the Constitution on the table? How do we get them to agree to a convention for that purpose? And so they said, well, we need something that appears on the surface to be limited, but in reality would not be. That's Convention of States project application. And we'll get into more where they admit that really. But okay, and just so you know, we mentioned this Convention of States project, ACF, is there any connection? Well, the founder, president, executive director of the ACF happens to be the Colorado State Coalition's director of the Convention of States project. And the vice president and director of operations happens to be the Colorado State director and senior advisor of the Article 5 Convention of States project. By the way, the Convention of States project is probably the best organized, most funded, heavily funded group pushing for a convention today. Okay. Now, this person here, you might have run into him. Probably not. His name is Robert Nadelson. But in the world of the people pushing for a convention, I've seen that they kind of coalesce around him and say, you know, this is the guy that's the expert, the academic, who we should trust about anything related to having a convention under Article 5. Back in 2013, he said this: when the states offer 34 applications on any one particular subject, the convention is limited to the scope of those applications. And then you remember the little history went through where their application rate, you might say, the number of applications they were picking up kind of plateaued, as that gentleman said. So then they came up with this new strategy, and Nadelson wrote in the Federalist a little different theory. He said, you know, the problem really is Congress is not counting these applications correctly. So he said, when counting applications toward a convention for proposing a balanced budget amendment, or indeed toward a convention for proposing any other kind of amendment, Congress should add to the count any extant plenary application. He's very good at the academic type of talk for academic journals, but basically plenary meaning same as general, unlimited application or resolution asking Congress for a convention. So add in all of that. So that's very different than saying, hey, everything has to be of the same subject or the same type of amendment that's desired. So he says we can combine these ones too to trigger a convention. All right. Well, some people jumped on board with that idea. Now, you might remember the quotes from Bill Fruth from Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force. Now, about the time that their movement was not going very far, they decided to regroup and start a different organization pushing for a balanced budget amendment. Instead of the Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force, they're now calling themselves Let Us Vote for a BBA, a Balanced Budget Amendment. And many times they would get together at the American Legislative Exchange Council at their conferences in the summer. So this is one quote that they had. Now this one was actually 2020 during the COVID stuff, so it was on Zoom. But David Biddulph was is one of the partners, you might say, with this Bill Fruth fellow. So he said, here's my idea. Okay, one state should pass one resolution that says, here are 34 Article 5 applications, 28 on a single subject, in other words, the Balanced Budget Amendment, and 6 on any subject. And we're going to demand that Congress call the convention. So when the persuasive tactic didn't work, they said, you know what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of throw a fit, and we're just going to say Congress owes us this convention. And if you think I'm kidding about that, here's some more detail about what he proposed. Okay, probably the next slide, but here's his list of states that had applied for a convention for a balanced budget amendment. Colorado, after they came out with that, they said, we don't like that being used for triggering a convention, so we're going to rescind. And then Illinois and New Jersey also said, no, these were actually applications trying to avert the Civil War, nothing to do with the balanced budget amendment. But of course, these people claimed that they could be lumped in with that, so down a little bit. So that's where that comes from. But they said, what we'll do is we'll ask for the, these are actually slides from the Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force, or Balanced Budget, Let Us Vote for a BBA, excuse me, that new group. We're going to ask for pledges from people running for federal office. And what we want them to pledge is to support our push for an amendment. But then they came out and said, well, here's some more details about this. Is it really a balanced budget amendment? Well, what it would actually do is prohibit total federal spending from increasing faster than inflation up to 2% plus population growth, and with the exception of Social Security and national emergencies. So it would just, you might say, decrease or limit the increase, the rate at which the spending increases? Is that really what the people pushing for a balanced budget largely had in mind? Probably not. It seems to be a little bit of a change, doesn't it? They also wanted it to be a vote of the people for ratification, for deciding if a proposed amendment, becomes part of the U.S. Constitution. So you might wonder, why would they do that, to want a vote of the people? We'll get into that. They also, in their question and answer section, said, well, okay, would this require this to balance the budget every year? Well, they say a BBA designed to limit the growth of government spending would not require budgets to balance annually. So not only would the budgets not be required to balance annually, but you would leave off one of the biggest spending items, Social Security, and during a national emergency, it would not apply. So basically a worthless type of amendment, but they go around pushing this. Now, I'll just kind of illustrate the switcheroo that they've decided to do with the language over time. So right here, we have it from Wyoming, the 1977 application for a balanced budget amendment convention. On the right side, we have from 2017 when they reapplied. So they had, in the interim, they had rescinded their application from 77, and then they reapplied 40 years later. Of course, you'll see in common, it's under Article 5, pursuant to Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. So it has the same authority to do the same thing, regardless of what you call it. But here you go. In 1977, they called it a constitutional convention. In 2017, they said, no, we want a convention of the states. Same authority, can do the same thing. Okay. Dried plums versus prunes. Then you have, in absence of national emergency, same clause there, and it has to balance for every fiscal year. So the thing is, if you look at the phrase national emergency, that actually is a legal phrase under the 1976 National Emergencies Act. We still have, and you can look this up just about anywhere, find out under that act, we still have 30 national emergencies. The oldest one is the Iran hostage situation. I'm sure all of you are very concerned about Iran taking hostages and all that. But we still are under a national emergency for, I don't know, over 40 years now. All right. Now, they often refer to the power of the people, and you might ask yourself, well, why do they do that? Why do they want ratification by a vote of the people? Well, here's one idea here to remember from history. Okay, back in 1787, when the Constitution that we have now was being drafted, the original idea when they went in, they said, we want to revise the current Constitution, which was the Articles of Confederation. And then they came to the point where they said, you know, we have to scrap this. We need to start over and draft a whole new Constitution. So the question came up, do we really have authority to do that? And they went back and forth, but finally they decided, and this is from Madison's notes, James Madison, father of the Constitution, the people were in fact the fountain of all power, and by resorting to them, all difficulties were got over. They could alter constitutions as they pleased. And he reiterated this fact in the Federalist Papers, which were written to convince people to ratify the Constitution. So in 1788, he said, it is admitted that the convention have departed from the tenor of their commission. Instead of reporting a plan requiring the confirmation of the legislatures of all the states, they have reported a plan which is to be confirmed by the people and may be carried out or carried into effect by 9 states only. You see, under the Articles of Confederation, it required ratification by every state legislature and Congress. That's not what happened. If you look at Article 7 in the US Constitution, ratification was by 9 state conventions, not state legislatures, state conventions. Didn't go through Congress at all. So it was, the number was changed, all kinds of things were changed in the ratification process. But they said, you know what? It's ruled by, it's by the people, the fountain of all power. And so that was kind of like putting on the One Ring or the Infinity Gauntlet if you're into sci-fi. We're glad they did it, but there's people looking for that ultimate power nowadays too, right? Power of the people. Okay. Now, just a little side note. I'm sure you're aware, the first 3 words of the preamble of the US Constitution, we the people. But it wasn't. Now, these are words from the Articles of Confederation, we the delegates. So very important wording. Who was ordaining and establishing the Constitution? It was the people, and that's how they got around the requirements for ratification that were in the Articles of Confederation. It was through the power of the people. Okay, now here's just an example of why it could be many states that have passed these applications for a convention for a balanced budget amendment. Many of them have what you call an aggregation clause. How we hope that Congress or expect that Congress would add these up to decide whether a convention is actually called. This one says, the legislature of the state of Utah respectfully requests that this application be considered as covering the same subject matter as the presently outstanding balanced budget applications from the states, and they list other states that have done so. And then it says the legislature of the state of Utah respectfully requests that this application be aggregated with the applications from those states, but not be aggregated with any applications on any other subject. Some states even had stronger language, which said shall not be aggregated with any applications on any other subject. So kind of a mandatory thing. Now, of course, what happened over time is the convention had not been triggered, and the move for it, at least for a balanced budget amendment, kind of plateaued. So this last legislative session in Utah, there was a new application brought forward by the same people. Actually, David Biddulph was there speaking online from Let Us Vote for a BBA, and he was pushing this. And this was part of this application. They said, you know what? We've done some research and we found out that it didn't really matter that all these applications were rescinded. We found that in 1979, since the state of Nevada passed one of these applications, that, now see in red here, a little different, combined with the Article 5 applications for a convention of states on any subject, this gives us 34 states, and Congress has been cheating us out of a convention for the last 43 years. Okay, well, fortunately, the committee didn't buy that. But the problem with that, the larger problem with that, is that these people are openly saying, you know what, we don't care what that application from 2015 from Utah said. We're going to demand that Congress add these up in a different way to trigger a convention. And then, really, how could you have a limited convention if you have any subject type of applications added up with limited subject applications? Now, just to make it more clear, this is from that group, Let Us Vote for a BBA, their model resolution, where they say this application is to be considered as covering the same subject matter as the presently outstanding balanced budget and unlimited subject applications from other states, including but not limited to previously adopted and applications from, and then the list of states. So I think I would say and is the operative word here, not or. It's not or. So if it's going to be covering the same subject as the balanced budget amendment and unlimited subject applications, the only way to do that is to have an unlimited convention. All right. Now, at least one state did figure this out, that there was some fraud going on. This is in Nevada back in 1989. And they said, based on the representation that the convention would be limited to proposing a balanced budget amendment, that's why we voted for this. And, the Constitution does not provide for a constitutional convention to be restricted to a single subject. So this call for a constitutional convention was therefore induced by fraud. Pretty strong words in a legislature to say something like that in a resolution. Okay, now I'm going to focus on the main group that's pushing, or the most heavily funded group that's pushing for a convention under Article 5. This is the Convention of States project. I'll just read this. The video is kind of long, but this is the Robert Kelly Staff Council for Convention of States. He says, and they were doing a debate on whether to have a convention. And so he admits our application, Convention of States project application, fairly broad. And my opponent's argument against this is that it opens up all the articles. In other words, the whole Constitution. But then he says, and that's true. Then he kind of hedged a bit and said, well, except for Article 6 and 7. Well, that's the supremacy clause in the ratification article. So, but basically he said, okay, it opens up the whole Constitution. That should be a little concerning. Now, some people might argue, oh, well, that was just kind of a fluke. He didn't really mean that. Okay, well, let's take a look at Mark Meckler. And I'm going to play this because this is just kind of a real gem. This was back in last summer. He was in South Dakota at the Freedom Fest, and somebody asked him a question. So let's see if I got this queued up. Okay, let's roll the tape.
The three, if there's no risk, then why did you put limitations on the enabling and educate the three basic limitations in the laws that you're
so as opposed to doing a general convention?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is referring to, if you look at the Convention of States project model resolution, they say we want a convention limited to these three subjects: limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, term limits on Congress and federal officers, and fiscal restraints. So it sounds like, oh, that's going to be limiting the federal government. So the guy says, well, why did you even put those in there if there's no risk of it going off into the weeds, so to speak? His answer is quite revealing.
So if there's no
Let's see if we can play this one.
So the reason is for narrative. In other words, if I were to say, if we were to put out there to the world that, hey, we're just going to have a convention, we have no idea what we're going to talk about at this convention, then frankly, nobody would support it because there'd be so much fear out there. Everybody would be afraid that we had to frame it in a way. I mean, this is one of the things that I think, I'm just going to say this generally, libertarians and conservatives are really bad at narrative. We just generally don't understand narrative. And if you don't frame a political discussion in the correct way, you lose.
Okay, so did you get what he's saying there? He's saying, if we came out and were honest about this and said that really we're going to have everything on the table in this convention, nobody would support it. So what we need to do is we need to have a compelling narrative. Frame this in such a way. So get people thinking that this is limiting, restricting the federal government, and then they'll buy into it. So framing is really a narrative is why they're doing this. Here's Mark Meckler again on narrative.
If we want to inspire the grassroots to engagement, our primary purpose has to be to tell a story that will engage them. This is probably the only thing I'm an expert on. That and shoveling stalls, I'm pretty good at that. That comes in handy, shoveling comes in handy in politics as well.
Okay, so Mark Meckler says, I'm an expert in telling an engaging story and shoveling, as he gracefully likes to call it. Okay, I'm going to give you a few examples of Mark Meckler's shoveling here.
Every single nationally known conservative, law professor, talker, politician who has taken a position nationally known on the Convention of States is in favor. There are no exceptions. Rush Limbaugh, God rest his soul, Levin, Hannity, Beck, Shapiro, all the professors I named on our legal advisory board, there are no exceptions.
Okay, so he says everybody who's a conservative, nationally known person, they're in favor of the Convention of States project. Basically, that was a lie. Here is somebody you might have seen on Fox News, for example. His name Andy Biggs. He's been the chair of the House Freedom Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. He also happened to write this book here called The Con of the Con. Sounds like he doesn't like the idea of a constitutional convention, does he, or Article 5 convention? Here is Alan Keyes. Probably heard of him. This is the father of the Constitution. James Madison. Here is Antonin Scalia, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Ron Paul. Here is Phyllis Schlafly, many years founded head of the Eagle Forum. So there's plenty of people nationally known who have opposed an Article 5 constitutional convention of states, whatever you want to call it. So not true. Here's another statement that's often promoted from the Convention of States organization. Quote from Mark Meckler, "We're not working to change the Constitution. We're working to restore the Constitution." Well, okay, the second one you could probably debate quite a long time about, but the first sentence is patently false. Surely Mark Meckler is not an idiot, and he knows that amending anything changes what you amend. And that's what they're proposing, of course. They propose an amendments convention under Article 5. Any state legislator should know that. They deal with amendments all the time. Anybody that makes laws or anything, they know what an amendment does. So to say that we're not working to change the US Constitution, patently false. It's not true. Now, once again, here is Mark Meckler trying to smear opposition.
It's also important to know the origin of those arguments. They come from an organization called the John Birch Society, decades ago chased from reasonable political discourse for issues of racism and anti-Semitism. So I think those arguments are long discredited, and especially before this legislature.
Okay, so he tries to smear the opposition before they get a chance to talk. This is called poisoning the well. Don't pay attention to what these guys are about to tell you, because they were accused of something nefarious in the past. Therefore, what they have to say on this particular subject we're talking about today, they don't have any weight, any authority to talk about that. They must be wrong and I'm right. So that's a logical fallacy if you've been in logic at all. But for what it's worth,
also-
this was actually in front of, Mark Meckler was speaking in front of the California committee in the state of California. He might have not have known this, but actually back in the 1960s, the California Senate did, it was actually an undercover investigation of the John Birch Society, because it was being investigated. Well, it was being smeared heavily by the media. Think anti-Trump stuff 10 times worse, okay? And they were accused of things that, you can find this report online, but the gist of it, in the end, it said the society has been publicly charged with being secret, fascist, subversive, un-American, anti-Semitic organization. We have not found any of these accusations to be supported by the evidence. Of course, right, the media just said, oh, okay, I guess we were wrong, and we'll just stop criticizing the John Birch Society, right? That's no, probably not. But it did set the record straight. It was very good. Okay. Now, here's a little, some people ask me often about the financials of the, let's see, of Convention of States. So this was a discussion at one of the hearings that just a couple of years, or last year.
This Convention of States has spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on PR. This is dark money. It's based out of Texas, California, Indiana. It is not from South Dakota. Take a look at South Dakota Secretary of State's records if you want to see how much money has been generated from the state of South Dakota. $3,000 in the last 10 years.
Okay, so that was an interesting revelation there. I wonder if any of that was actually accurate. You can imagine Mark Meckler, who was present at this hearing, he had a different
Convention
side of this. So here's what Mark Meckler said.
You've heard a lot of things from the opponents, a lot of alleged facts and allegations and frankly, smears, dark money, dangerous people. I just want to give you a little background on the organization. I founded the organization myself. It operates out of a big fancy office building located in the middle of my house outside of Austin, Texas. The money is raised by my wife, Patty, who is our only development director.
Wow. So one side says Convention of States, they've got just tons and tons of money, millions of dollars. And the way Mark Meckler tells it, it sounds like, well, this is just run out of his house. It's just kind of a mom and pop operation. I wonder which side is true. Well, fortunately, some people did a little bit of digging. And Convention of States Project files, or Convention of States Action, their action arm, filed what's called 990 IRS forms. The most recent 3 ones that we have, they don't give the names of the donors, but they do say how many major donors they had for that fiscal year. Now, a major donor is defined as somebody that gave $5,000 or more during that year. So if you total these up, you see that they gave 18.8 million, or they received in total $18.8 million in contributions over 3 years. 54% of that was from major donors, people giving $5,000 or more, and the average major donation, assuming that every major donor gave only once, which is not terribly likely, but $81,234. And by the way, 7% of those receipts during those years went to the Meckler family, Mark, his wife, and their son. $1.3 million, roughly a little over $400,000 per year. I'm guessing their house is, they're not running this out of their garage or their basement or anything like that. In fact, this building right here is the fancy office building. If you go to the Convention of States Project website, Convention of States Action in Houston, Texas, not Austin, where Convention of States Project is headquartered. Now, this past year, convention states, they got really frustrated, and especially in South Dakota. This is the gentleman, I hope he's still here tonight, listening in, but they decided, you know what, we want to get this thing through the state legislature, so we're just going to pour money into try to getting rid of these 4 candidates for state senate. Now,
I'm
this
still
is
here, Eldon.
okay, great. You can give the firsthand account, right? But they gave almost $350,000 to try to defeat these 4. One of them was narrowly defeated. But I would say that was probably not their best investment. They just flooded the market with attack ads of all kinds, polling radio ads, cable TV ads, etc. Okay, here's an example of a postcard. Now, I don't know how accurate these postcards are and what they say that how the people voted, but one thing to note is that none of these postcards or robocalls or whatever it was mentioned anything about amending the US Constitution. They just said, so-and-so is a bad guy, don't vote for him. And here's an unrelated subject that why we think you should not. Okay, nobody knew that. Most people had no idea it was coming from a group that wanted to change the US Constitution. And by the way, the address for this group, they formed a new super PAC called the Convention of States Political Fund. Its headquarters, its address was at this building here. It's 3 blocks, literally 3 blocks from the US Capitol in Washington, DC. That's the Convention of States Political Fund address. And this is the same group that says we want to bypass Congress. We want to drain the swamp. Interesting. Okay, here's another assertion from Mark Meckler. Okay.
The number of lawyers on our legal advisory board and their stature in the legal community is second to none. Professor Robbie George at Princeton, who's considered the foremost conservative constitutional scholar in America, is on our legal advisory board.
So he says, wow, we've got the foremost conservative constitutional scholar in America. He's on our legal advisory board. That must be really exciting. And people say, oh, Robbie George, I've never heard of him, but he must be a really cool guy, right? So here's a little bit about Robbie George. Robbie George happens to be somebody that co-authored a replacement for the US Constitution called the Conservative Constitution. Does that sound very conservative? He's also a member of the Deep State Council on Foreign Relations. He holds the chair at Princeton that's called the Woodrow Wilson Chair. You remember Woodrow Wilson, the real conservative guy, right? He's very well known for being conservative. No, not really. So that's who Robbie George is. But if you dig a little bit deeper into this conservative constitution that he co-authored, here's some things that don't sound too conservative, right? It guts the Second Amendment. It puts the national popular vote, in other words, abolishing the Electoral College for choosing who the president would be. Not surprisingly, Robbie George is one of what you might call anti-Trump or never Trump type of Republican. Okay. Expands the power of the central bank. So that's various things and makes it a lot easier to remove the president for impeachment for just about any cause, undefined cause. Okay, just in case you're wondering. Now, Convention of States has been accused in the past, and they've tried to brush it off. Hey, you guys are you want to change the Second Amendment. Well, here's Robbie George. He's on the legal advisory board of the Convention of States project. This is his revised version of the Second Amendment. Neither the states nor the United States shall make or enforce any law infringing the right to keep and bear arms. If it would have stopped there, it would have been good, but it goes on. Of the sort ordinarily used for self-defense and recreational purposes, provided that states and the United States, in places subject to its general regulatory authority, may enact and enforce reasonable regulations on the bearing of arms and the keeping of arms by persons determined with due process to be dangerous to themselves or others. Does that sound conservative to you? Does that sound like it guts the Second Amendment? Sounds to me like more the latter. Here's Mark Meckler. You might wonder, how did he get started in this whole thing? Well, the person on the left here is a man named Lawrence Lessig. He's a Harvard, very liberal, openly leftist law professor at Harvard University, Harvard Law School. Okay, in 2011, Meckler and Lessig co-hosted the Conference on a Constitutional Convention. Now, Lessig has been open in his calls. He said we should rewrite the Constitution. He came out openly and said that. But by 2017, Meckler and, let's see if I can play this little clip for you, and Lessig were on the same side of a debate, pushing for a convention.
Larry Lessig, thank you. Tell us, please, who your partner is in this debate.
So my partner is my friend and someone I've worked with for a long time, Mark Meckler.
Mark Meckler, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, so there you have the co-founder of the Convention of States Project, president, CEO, partnering with a very left-wing man who's sometimes called the godfather of the Article 5 convention movement, Larry Lessig. He wants to open up the Constitution for any changes. Lessig does.
Larry Lessig.
All right. So Lessig, just a little bit about him. He wrote a book in 2011 called Republic Lost: How Money Corrupts Congress. So he's kind of famous for leading the charge to overturn the Citizens United ruling. So he says, well, what we need to do here, he says, it's going to be much easier to get a conversation about fundamental reform going in the context of a call for a convention. This is an important strategic opportunity that a call for a convention would offer. Different souls with different objectives could agree on the need for a convention without agreeing on the particular proposals that a convention should recommend. Okay, so he basically says, you know what? Let's just agree that we're going to work together to trigger a convention, and that's it. All right. Now, last year in December, various groups on the left, Wolfpack, one of them, American Promise, Path to Reform, and then on the right, and also one that's kind of a libertarian, they got together in San Diego and said, okay, how can we work together just to trigger a convention? And then we'll figure out the details, and hopefully we get our proposals proposed as amendments to the US Constitution. Larry Lessig was there. So was Ken Ivory from Utah. Some of you are familiar with him, okay? Here's Mark Meckler saying basically the same thing. He says, you've got all these disparate groups that have different ideas on how and why we should be limiting the power and scope of the federal government, and we want them to bring them all under a big tent.
So you've got all.
All right. Now, just in case you were wondering, here is the other co-founder, Michael Ferris of the Convention of States Project. And they say they were at one of these American Legislative Exchange Council things promoting a convention through Convention of States Project. Someone asked them the common question, well, okay, let's say we change the Constitution. How can we ensure that these new amendments are going to be followed? And Ferris says, you know, the greatest thing, I'll just play it here because it's just so good. Okay.
The greatest thing that we can achieve out of a convention is if they mess it up again, we call another convention. And
what? Okay, so they mess it up, and we just, you know, if the hammer doesn't fix it after pounding something, we just hit it again with the hammer. I mean, it's just so nonsensical, isn't it? But that's his approach. So you get the idea that the basic idea is we need to change the Constitution. That's what they're after. Okay. Early 2017, shortly before Trump was inaugurated, excuse me, Mark Meckler was quoted as saying, the hordes have broken down the gates of Washington, D.C., and now we should tear the structure down. Well, a very left-wing publication named The Nation magazine picked up on that. They thought, well, that's really good. Tear the structure down. They liked that idea. And so they wrote a whole article and saying why the left should embrace the movement for a new constitutional convention. They quoted, for example, Sanford Levinson has a book called Our Undemocratic Constitution. And he says that if a majority voted against the Constitution in a national referendum, there would be a new convention to reconsider the whole structure. Notice that term structure again. Mark Meckler used it, and now Sanford Levinson. What is the structure that they're talking about? Well, it seems to be the Constitution. But let's see if that's the case. Here's Mark Meckler again before the Pennsylvania State Senate. He says, the resolution before you, of course, it's a resolution applying for a convention under Article 5, offers a structural solution to a structural problem. So obviously he's referring to changing the US Constitution because the US Constitution there's a problem with it. So we need to change it because that's what an Article 5 convention process would do. It aims toward changing the US Constitution. Okay. More from this article. Constitution change was at the center of the original progressive agenda. So this is the Nation magazine endorsing a convention of states. Okay. A convention of states, therefore, is the best remaining option for sorely needed constitutional reforms, rather than ridicule the efforts to adapt the Constitution for the present day. A talking point from progressives, small d Democrats ought, with eyes wide open, to join them. So yes, there are people on the left pushing for a convention. There you go. And what do they hope to achieve from that? Well, get rid of the Electoral College, kind of like Robbie George wants to do, who is advising Convention of States Project, right to healthcare, education, housing, all those social type rights, basic income. The left shouldn't be afraid of a runaway convention. It should welcome one. Yeah, that's what Lawrence Lessig wants. He wants we should have more runaway conventions, he says. Okay, so more from Michael Ferris, co-founder of Convention of States Project. Does this sound like a small, basically he's inferring that this would fit within their application for a convention. Okay, we'll play this.
For one thing I would do is I would make it have like the court of the European Court of Justice. We should have 50 Supreme Court justices, and they should be appointed by the state legislatures.
Okay, so we should have 50 Supreme Court justices. That would obviously be a large revision of the third article of the US Constitution, which defines the judiciary, right? Major change. Apparently, that would fit within the Convention of States Project application. Now, if you don't think that is kind of outrageous, take a look at this next
One thing
quote.
I would do, if they abuse it, we just keep calling it. So if the Supreme Court messes up, okay, let's abolish it. If they're going to ignore the Constitution, we abolish the Supreme Court and figure out some other way to settle the disputes.
Okay, so abolishing the Supreme Court would be within the application, in his mind, Michael Ferris, co-founder of the Convention of States Project, of the application for a convention under Convention of States Project's language in their application, their model application. You wonder what else might fit within that if this falls within it. It kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Now, one of the most common arguments that the people pushing for a convention use, they say, don't worry, nothing bad can happen. You'd have to have 3/4 of the states, either state legislatures or special state ratification conventions, to approve anything. So here's Tom Coburn. He's since passed away, but he was making this argument. See if, okay.
Worst case scenario is somebody's going to do something stupid, which I think is impossible for it to happen. Especially since the state, remember, the federal government didn't run it. If the federal government was running, I think it could be stupid. But if the states are running this, none of this is going to happen. But if it did, you have to be irrational to think that the states aren't going to stop something that came out of there that limited our freedoms.
Okay, there's a couple of problems with this. If any of you have been in the state legislature, have you ever seen the state legislature do something stupid? Well, maybe you don't like to think that they would or that they ever have, but I think a lot of us have seen that. But take a look at the last 2 years. We had lockdowns, forced vaccinations, vaccine passports, all kinds of tyrannical measures pushed in the name of public health. And was it common or uncommon for the state legislatures to stand up and say, you know what, we've got to defend the liberty of the people? For the most part, they were the ones that empowered the governors and the health officers to do such things. Now, here's another example, if that's not convincing. Okay.
That's the word.
Here is the from 1911 from South Dakota, the Journal, when the income tax came up. A lot of people don't think the income tax was a conservative thing. It's actually part of the one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto. If you look in there, it's a communist, a Marxist provision. When it came up in a legislature over 80% Republican, so for those of you that might think Republicans are going to be standing in the gap, not necessarily, 41-0 in the Senate. Nobody voted against it. Same in the House. Everybody voted for it when it came up in the state of South Dakota. Not enough stood against it. Now, this is how the makeup nationally today is. Partisan, red, so a little over 54% Republican, a little over 44% Democratic party affiliation with state legislators nationwide. How do you think one of these conventions might go? Okay, so this is what Lessig concludes. He says in this, in his chapter, well, this is actually part from that article from the Nation. It says in his chapter on an Article 5 convention in Republic Lost, Lessig suggests a grand bargain. The key is to get a simple compromise. We get to consider our proposals if you get to consider yours. How have those compromises gone when you've witnessed them perhaps in your legislature or in Congress? Not so well for the conservative side. But finally, there's something that I agree with Mark Meckler. Here he was on the radio making a very good point.
The founders told us the Constitution itself was nothing more than a parchment barrier. It was going to take the will of the people to support the ideas in the Constitution. That's what it's going to take again. Okay,
so somebody asked him, well, how do we enforce this if we have new amendments? Well, in the end, he admits, yeah, it's going to take the will of the people to understand and support the ideas in the Constitution if they're going to be put in force, which is exactly what the founders said, what the John Birch Society has been saying for years and years. The Constitution is in force if you understand and apply it and insist that it be followed. So what we've done over the years, actually with quite a bit of success, for example, educating voters on how their U.S. representatives, U.S. senators voted based upon the Constitution, because the Constitution is a standard that all of them swear to uphold. Some of them do better than others, as you can see. We need to get to work. It's a four-letter word, but we need to rein in big government with Article 6, which is basically enforcing the Constitution. And of course, we need to stand up against the push for a constitutional convention, Article 5 convention, whatever you want to call it. Some people call this standing up, enforcing the Constitution, call it nullification. I just call it saying no as the founders intended. The founders wrote quite extensively about this, on how this was to be done, but it's in the spirit of 1776. They saw that their rights as British subjects were being violated. They stood up and they enforced them, ultimately had to fight a war We don't want to do that, but that is the spirit of it. But really, nullification is not secession. It's not trying to, go to war or anything like that. It's just being assertive and saying, you know what, you don't have authority to do that, so we're not going to support that. That's all that is. Highly recommend the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates book. Very quick read. What to do first: ask your state legislators to oppose any Article 5 convention applications. And that if there are any on the books in your state, ask them to support rescinding them. We don't want to open up the Constitution. We have better ways to enforce the Constitution. I'd like to invite you all to consider joining the John Birch Society. And you probably can't see this, maybe you can, but I've got a little packet here. One of the best parts of it is The Law by Frederick Bastiat. So if you join, since we're online, I'll just say by the end of the business day on, say, Monday, give you a few days, you can call up JBS headquarters or just go to jbs.org/join. If you think you might want to do something else, I do have packets to stop a con, or you want to talk with me about hosting Constitution is the Solution video series, send me a message, reply to my email, say, hey, I'm interested in that, in getting together with a group of my friends and going through that. We need to build a constitutionally literate society. So with that, just encourage you to get involved. Hope you all learned a little bit, and we're gonna open it up for questions and comments. I know I probably should allow Dave to say something if he'd like to. I know it's.
Thank you, Eldon.
Yeah.
Yeah, very comprehensive. Yeah, there's nothing like being subjected to over $100,000 worth of money coming in from out of state against you in a primary. But we prevailed, and most of the people in South Dakota who were subjected to those cards that you displayed were irritated because they didn't just come in one or two. I know that the people in my district received 18 of those cards. These were full 8.5 by 11 hard stock cards that were arrived in the mail. And by the time the election came, so many of my constituents were very angry about this money coming in from out of state trying to purchase our election. And ultimately it failed. I was reelected. I had a 650 vote margin in my district over my Convention of States sponsored opponent. So it did boomerang on them, I believe. And 650 votes doesn't sound like a lot, but in a state legislative race in a state like South Dakota in a primary election, that is a substantial win. So I believe it boomeranged on them, and I just don't wish that kind of publicity on anybody. It's difficult to have that kind of attention. And it was all false. It was lies, blatant lies, smear attacks, and it was on television, it was on radio, and it was in the mailers. They even hired students from the East Coast and Colorado from an organization called Young Americans for Liberty. This is all paid for by Convention of States project. And they brought in these students to go door to door for my Convention of States sponsored opponent. And these kids, their travel was paid for by Convention of States project. Their food, lodging, and travel was all paid for by Convention of States. It was a substantial onslaught against me by this supposedly patriotic American organization called Convention of States Project. In my opinion, it's an evil organization, and they've proven it this time around. I wanted to mention one other thing, Eldon. I don't know if you're aware, but the National Archives and the Office of the Federal Register has published what the constitutional amendment process is. And that convention, or that
in the second paragraph of the National Archives, where it discusses the constitutional amendment process, it reads, and I quote, "The Constitution provides that an amendment may be proposed either by the Congress with 2/3 majority vote in both the House and the Senate, or by a constitutional convention called for by 2/3 of the state legislatures. None of the 27 amendments to the Constitution have been proposed by the Constitutional Convention process." So that comes straight from the National Archives and the Office of the Federal Register. So that's one more source when the proponents of a con come to your state legislature. You can just point to the National Archives and you can identify that the National Archives and the Office of the Federal Register also considers an Article 5 a constitutional convention. Thank you again for what you've done here tonight. You're muted, Eldon.
Thank you. Yeah, I probably wouldn't want to go through all that onslaught in a campaign. That sounds pretty tough. Okay, I think Glenn has a question or comment.
I have a comment. I just thought, you know, there's people debating the finer points of would a convention be limited in scope, and is it even possible to limit it in scope? And I've heard people say that even if the applications say it's limited, and even if Congress says it's limited when they call it, they could argue that Article 5 doesn't allow for it to be limited. And then after the convention's convened, they could claim that it can't be limited because the Constitution doesn't authorize it to be limited. And also, even if you got a convention that was limited, maybe either by the applications or when Congress calls a convention, they explicitly limit the scope or something. Say you had a convention that said you can only consider amendments to the Constitution that are for a balanced budget. Well, have you ever seen the amendments on one bill in Congress? You know, when we have these bills that are 2,000 pages, and they try to get around in the Senate, they try to avoid the need for, you know, or bypass the possibility of a filibuster by taking things that have nothing to do with the budget or the spending bills and tacking on the budget and spending bills because those are filibuster proof. You know, you could have one amendment to the Constitution that's pages long that covers all kinds of things that aren't a balanced budget, and it talks about the balanced budget. And you could argue that, hey, we only talked about this balanced budget amendment. You're muted again.
That goes, yeah. Glenn, that it's Dave Johnson, State Senator Dave Johnson again. That goes to the issue of the fact that that convention once called is plenipotentiary, meaning that they have the power. Ultimately, the people of that convention have the power to do whatever they wish. Plenipotentiary is a big word, but it's a very powerful concept that we need to understand, and that we need to try to get these proponents of a con, we need to try to get them to understand the power that those delegates have once that convention is called. And you put it very succinctly and very well.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right, other questions, comments? Somebody's got to be itching to say something, right? Okay, Representative Ottman, welcome.
Yes. Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, what I'm wondering is, I have a very large mileage district in Wyoming, and the majority of it is rural. I get dozens and dozens and dozens of emails saying, I am your constituent and I support the Convention of States. I wasn't originally for it because there was too many unanswered questions, but I got pounded by a bunch of people, and on the emails I cannot respond to them, and I cannot find out who the instigator or the organizer is here, if in fact it is someone here. So as I'm trying to meet with people, because I may only meet with 3 or 5 or whatever at a time, or, you know, in a big group, what is the best way? Because this information tonight is a lot of what I've thought or heard, and a lot of it I've never heard. So what is the best way for me to become able to succinctly explain a viewpoint of concern to these people that they're going to understand when, you know, they think that this is just the answer?
Right. Maybe I should defer to Representative Johnson on this. He's probably, I know you've had some experience with that scenario. Is it safe to say?
Yeah, well, first I'll correct you to mention that I'm a senator, not a representative.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I fulfilled 4 years.
I apologize.
I was 4 years in the House, in the South Dakota State House. So I've experienced both. Now I've had one term in the state Senate in South Dakota. What I would, one thing you could do is you could refer them directly to me, because I did do a study of those emails that you receive. 52%, it's in my, I wrote a white paper on this issue. 52%, almost 53% of those emails that I got were bogus. And I say that they were bogus because they came from people who were deceased, or from addresses that did not exist. If you actually took a house number on Elm Street and you track it down, the address did not even exist. A lot of them were from people that were not in my district. And yet that first line on that, every single one of those emails, it says, I am your constituent and I am in favor of this constitutional convention. I got tired of reading the thing. It's a form letter. One other thing you might do, Representative Ottman, is go on to the Convention of States website. Actually go on to it and see how easy it is for you to go on their website and submit a quote signature on their website with somebody else's name or somebody else's address. Just practice with it and see if you can't get a letter from yourself under a bogus name or a bogus address, and see if you can't get that to come on to your email address, because I was able to do it. And I know that they've got people out there pressing that button. All it is a click of a button. Put in any name you want, any address you want, any email you want, and you have now a quote signer of the petition. And when half of them are bogus, that's irritating to me. And now they're spouting that off at the last session that we had in February. They're spouting off that they've got thousands and thousands of people, South Dakotans, who have signed this petition. It's just not the case. And they're proud of the fact that they've got 8,000 people in South Dakota. Well, what about the other 880,000 people in South Dakota who have not signed that petition? That's assuming they're all true, or they're all factual. So, I'll tell you what, I've gone through a lot with this Convention of States project over the last 6 years. I'm the banner carrier in South Dakota, but this year they picked on 4 of us, and so they're going to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time. They better be prepared for some angry legislators if they show their face in South Dakota again after what they did in this primary.
Follow up, please.
Sure, yeah.
What, so am I understanding that then the purpose is not from the people that may be looking like, you know, our government is a mess, look at the mandates that have come down and look at the state of spending and those things, but that there is a group that is wanting to actually dismember our Constitution, and this is a very good way to do it.
Yeah.
My response, Eldon, Representative, is my word is wreck. Their intent is to wreck the United States Constitution. And what they do is you got John Birch Society out there educating people on this issue. What you've got Convention of States Project doing is agitating people. They get out there and they have these taglines that are so attractive: rein in the federal government, balanced budget amendment, fiscal responsibility. Who can possibly argue against that? I know I can't, because I support all three of those ideas. But the purpose, look at the stated purpose of the Convention of States project, and that is to what? Change the Constitution. That's their purpose. They can't get that past people who are intelligent about the issue, so they come up with these taglines that are attractive to anybody and every American, especially Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, where we're ultra conservative, and that's what everybody wants. We all want to rein in the federal government. But there are ways to do that, but it's certainly not through changing that Constitution that I swore an oath to protect and defend.
And one other question, if I might. YAL use for liberty was mentioned earlier. That I thought was a offshoot of Campaign for Liberty, who the libertarians and the conservative, is there just people in there that are doing things that really don't go along with that, or am I wrong in thinking it is C4L as well as YAL? Thank you.
Go ahead, Eldon.
I don't think Young Americans for Liberty is connected with the Ron Paul's group, Campaign for Liberty. They've been around it longer, the Young Americans for Liberty. So that's their Young Americans for Liberty, I'd say, is more of a leaning more, different ways to describe it, moderate, conservative type, rather than a more of a libertarian type leaning. Yeah, you bet. Okay. Wow, very good questions. That was some good discussion. Any others? I know we're pushing about 90 here, but some good interest. Okay, Glenn.
It's just one more comment. I've always thought on this issue, like, they want to do things to the Constitution in a convention because they can't do those things to a Constitution through the traditional amendment process. They can't get the votes. And maybe there's a reason they can't get the votes. The founders designed our system of government to resist change, to be difficult to change, and they did that on purpose. And it just seems a much safer way. You can debate a balanced budget amendment and push for its merits. And if you're trying to get Democrats and Republicans together on it, you can do that in Congress through the traditional amendment process. And it's safer because it can't run away.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize this, but it was back, I'd say about 2004, maybe 2003. The balanced budget amendment was passed by 2/3 of the House of Representatives, U.S. House. It came within one vote of passing in the U.S. Senate, of getting 67 votes to be proposed and sent to the states. So it's not at all outside of the question that Congress could, with just a little more pressure, propose that balanced budget amendment and send it to the states without going through all these unanswered questions about how a convention might operate.
I'd like to add another thing. One of the primary arguments you're going to supporting the Constitutional Convention representative specifically, one of the things you'll hear over and over and over again is, well, there's always the safety of the fact that 2/3 of the states, 2/3 of the state legislatures must approve. Therefore, nothing bad is going to happen. Well, number one, we've seen historically that bad things do happen and bad amendments do get passed by 3/4 or what is it, Eldon, 3/4 or?
Yeah, 3/4.
3/4 of state legislatures. We've seen the income tax. We've seen the removal of selection of our senators from legislatures out to the people. So bad things do happen. But what's really more important is that Article 5 specifically states that Congress is the one that declares how the ratification process will occur. And it does not state that the legislatures shall approve any amendments by a con-con. It says that Congress shall decide whether it goes through the state legislatures or through a special ratification convention, meaning that the con-con, the Constitutional Convention can come up with amendment, and then it might possibly go to another convention of the state of South Dakota or Wyoming for passage. So under no circumstances is you as a state legislator going to have the option of electing or voting on an amendment. But you'll hear it all the time. They gloss over this idea that it might be the convention itself that passes that amendment. So when you hear them say, well, the state legislature always has a vote, that's just not true. And it's one of the very specific items that's in Article 5. It's Article 5, the pertinent part of a con-con, is only 89 words long. I wish people would actually read it. So many legislators don't even take the time to read 89 words of Article 5.
Very good
I kind
point.
of get on my preaching on this issue. I've paid a lot to.
Yep.
Never mind.
No, that's very good. Very good point to make. All right, Representative Ottman.
Yes, just a follow, and I know you're running out of time, and hopefully I'm not keeping someone else from asking a question. But just to say, I'm glad I made this. I couldn't find the email. That's why I was late getting on here. But I went to an ALEC conference where Mark Meckler and quite a crew of people were 2 years ago. And it was very convincing. And then you sit in the committee and, you know, they're going to help you develop legislation. Then you get these emails, and it's very difficult to discern things like this in depth. And so I'm very, very glad that that you do have this evening, because I mean, I've gotten lots of people and videos and YouTubes and personal calls and prayer calls and all of these things that that really lead you down that road, and you're just thinking, well, I guess they know what they're talking about. How could all these people be leading me down the wrong way? And then you still have this nagging thought is, why don't we just get an amendment like we have with the other one? I don't know. So anyway, I appreciate this tonight. I am so thankful that I got the email, and I will get some more information. Is there a way to review this session again? Thank you so much.
Yes, I'll be uploading the video to YouTube and then sending out the link so that, you know, anybody wants to review it, they can share it with others, whatever. I'm glad you found it really helpful. You know, so you never know who's going to be on. So I know the Convention of States project, they're very good at what they do in the sense of marketing. And that's really Mark Meckler. You remember a little quote from him, is that's his strength. And so, but sometimes it's hard to sort out, well, is this a marketing claim, or how close is this to reality? Are they just telling me something they think I might want to hear? So it's but it does take a lot to sort through those and get voices on many sides. All right.
I think you just have to remember that the truth is not always easy, especially when you're running up against the millions of dollars of dark money that are out there supporting this effort to wreck the Constitution. And they must be good at marketing and doing what they're doing to you and I as legislators, or it wouldn't go, because people across America love the Constitution. And if their goal is to wreck it, which it clearly is, then they wouldn't be able to pass it without some substantial dollars, dark money dollars that you and I don't have I've got the change in my pocket. And fighting against the millions of dollars of dark money that funds the Convention of States project is not easy. And there is a price to pay. You will pay it, but it's the right thing to do. It's the Christian thing to do. It's the American thing to do. And you swore an oath. I swore that oath as an officer in the United States Air Force as well. And I will give my life to defending that Constitution. And that's what drives me. When I'm under attack, when my family is under attack by the dark dollars, that's what keeps me going. And so far, I've been able to come out at the end of the battle, scarred, bruised, bloody, and very sore, but victorious. And that's why I'm proud to say South Dakota has not yet endorsed this con idea. I would ask you to stand strong, don't waver, go with the truth, go with what is in your heart. And the people on this broadcast, I'm assuming most of us are lovers and defenders and protectors of our Constitution. That's all you get. That's all you're going to get. Satisfaction at the end of the battle that you won and you protected your Constitution.
Wow, so well said. Well, I want to thank you, Senator Johnson, and
Senator, thank you.
Yes, try to get it right. I think Glenn has a question or comment.
I
The
know we're
other
going
folks, I
late.
can't see them, but if you need to go, feel free to go, but feel free to stick around too.
I know we're going late and I comment a bunch, but I keep having ideas. I just thought, if they're pitching this as, well, it's safe, it won't run away, it can be limited, it's gonna, all these saying it, trying to convince us that it's safe. Well, if they're serious about that, why don't you offer to them to say, propose a regular amendment? The 28th Amendment can provide a third distinct mechanism whereby you can call a convention of states with very specific, where it's not more than just 89 words, where it does lay it out, where it's right in an amendment of the Constitution, say you can call a convention under this third distinct mechanism, and applications for that are separate from the Article 5 applications. And if that's called, then before it's called, it has to be spelled out exactly what could be addressed and exactly how things would be ratified. And you could put those limits right into the Constitution with a regular amendment process before you have a convention. I'm sure
and just kind of in the for what it's worth column, there was a push to try to do that, to actually have a convention called for the purpose of amending Article 5. This would be back in the 50s and 60s. And now that movement didn't get real far, but they were trying to address some of those concerns that Article 5 really doesn't spell out a long list of key questions, doesn't really answer them. So they were wanting to have that, but as it is now, no, I wouldn't. But one thing, somebody, you often hear a talking point. They say, well, a convention is just like Congress proposing an amendment. Well, actually, it's really not. If you really think about it, Congress, we know who they are. We know where their offices are. We know their terms of office. We know who pays them, how much they get paid. We can look up any proposed legislation on congress.gov and read it for ourselves. We know how long they're in session. There's so many things that we know about Congress, how they voted, what they spoke about. None of those things are guaranteed with an Article 5 convention. So to compare it to Congress deliberating or anything like that, you break it down, really not.
Well, and if Congress proposes an amendment, you get to see the final text before the states vote on it. With an Article 5, you give them the power first, and then they take it and do what they want with it.
Yeah, there's so many unknowns with a convention process for proposing amendments. It's we could really we could go testify, say if somebody introduces a proposed amendment to the Constitution through Congress, you could go to DC and testify, right? Could you do that? Who knows? With a convention. Yeah, very good insights. Anybody else who's probably face I can't see, but we can probably hear you if unmute yourself if you want to make a comment, question. Very good discussion tonight, boy. Well, okay.
Could I just ask real quick? I missed the introductions, I think. We have Senator Dave Johnson and Representative Ottman, but in what bodies? You're both state level, in which states? I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm a state senator from the state of South Dakota, which is District 33, which is western South Dakota, Rapid City area in the central Black Hills of South Dakota. And before Representative Ottman comes on, I want to make sure that anybody who is on this evening, I'll give you my phone number right now in public. I would like you to call me if you have any questions about this. I would like to meet with Representative Ottman, whether it be over the telephone or, sometime when I'm in Wyoming. I don't know where you're at, but I have flown to Montana. I've spoken with representatives and other senators from Kansas, Wisconsin on this. I mean, the more the more legislators that we get together on this, the better off we're all going to be. And in fact, rescinding existing resolutions is one other way to fight back, not just to defeat their applications for a con, but to rescind any applications that are currently on the books in your state. And it's a proud, proud day when you are successful against defeating a con application or rescinding an application that you may have on the books. Eldon, does Wyoming have any kind of a BBA con on file?
They do, from the 2017 session. Yep.
So Glenn, thank you for the question. My phone number is 605-209-0555. Anybody can call me. And in fact, Convention of States Project called me 2 years ago during session. I had over 700 phone calls. It was when they put out a national effort to try to humiliate me or try to subject me to so much pressure that I would bend. I had over 700 phone calls in 1 week on my cell phone from across the United States. Convention of States Project and this Levine character put it out, and they say, call him, attack him. So there's so many nefarious things that they do to try to intimidate legislators. And it works, I'm afraid, on some of them.
Would you repeat your number slowly for the old people? Thank you.
South Dakota area code 605-209-0555. And if you call and refer to this what we were doing here this evening, and leave a message. If I don't answer, I still work for a living, and I'd be glad to talk with you. We can meet up. We can go somewhere and have a little session on how to fight this con, this dangerous part of American society that we all have to fight.
Perfect. Thank you. Eldon, is there anything on the books for Utah, please?
Yes, there is. There are two in Utah. One is on the balanced budget amendment. That's from the 2015 session. And another is from the Convention of States Project from 2019 session.
Well, we'll have to get those off the books, right?
That would be what I would recommend for
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah.
And just to say, my name is Pepper Ottman, and I am the Wyoming's House Representative District 34, which is central Wyoming, Du Bois, Riverton, those communities, Pavilion, Little Jeffrey City, part of Riverton, the eastern part. It's the rural district here. So That's where I am.
Is Casper part of District 34?
No, Casper is 120 miles east.
Thank you both.
Yes, indeed. Right in the middle of the state. Yep. Good place. Well, thank you all for coming. And, I can stick around. You probably imagine I kind of swim in these things, so I could talk about this stuff all day. So certainly happy if anybody has anything they want to chat about it. I'm just glad, so many good comments, questions. I'm so glad that you felt this was valuable. I know I sometimes get a little long in some of these details, but hopefully you didn't feel it was too overburdening on information dump on everybody.
It was very, very good. Thank you from us. At some point, we would love to chat, and we knew about all the efforts for CONCON, and some of them were sounding really good and really freedom oriented, but with your presentation, now we understand a lot more. Would want to know a little bit more at some other time or any time. What are the procedures to get these things off the books?
Rescission, basically, in a very briefly, right? You need to find somebody in the legislature that would sponsor a rescission resolution. Generally, it's as a form of a resolution in your legislature. That's to get it introduced. So you might talk with your own state legislator and see if they would consider it. Or it might be looking back and seeing who voted against these applications in the past and see if they're still there and approach them.
There are facilities or organizations that can get existing rescission language. I've written 2 of them myself. I've gotten very, very close. I've gotten it passed through one of the chambers before. It's a rescission bill. Very, very simple to write. If your legislator wants a copy of a rescission model that they can then take to their council or to their staff, and they can have them rewrite in the language of your state. They are readily available, and they're very simple language, actually. So, and I can send you, if you want a copy of the rescission bill that I wrote for South Dakota, I'd be happy to send you a copy of it, and you can hand that to your legislator, help them. So they're available.
What state, Susie and Mark?
Utah.
You guys in Utah?
Yeah, we're in Utah. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. There's all kinds of. John Birch Society has a model resolution. I think when you're drafting that up in that process, you kind of have to ask yourself, in our legislator, what language is going to be best received? Sometimes you want lots of flowery language, whereas, and other times I've seen rescission resolutions, they're just extremely short. It just says this is rescinded and that's it. Because some legislators, they just say, hey, get to the point. I don't care about the whereases, just cut to the therefore be resolved, and that's it. Just kind of depends where you are.
Thanks so much. Senator Johnson, I sent you my email. Thank you. Just to collect as much information as we can.
Okay, well, feel free to call, and if you're asking me to send you a copy of that rescission bill that we wrote in South Dakota, I'd be happy to do that. If there's other specific information that you'd like, I'd be happy to help you with that too.
Yeah, I would say out of rescission.
We have another visitor.
Oh, there we go. I thought my kids
This
were
is-
going to come in. Huh.
This is my grandson. He's
Okay.
this is why we do what we do, Representative. And Glenn, this is the reason right here.
Absolutely.
I didn't time that.
Okay. That's good. Yeah. Well, yeah, rescission is something that's generally not a quick thing to pull off. You can imagine, just like anybody, legislators are people just like you and I. And it's not easy to say, you know, maybe I voted the wrong way in the past. Maybe I should reconsider this. Not an easy thing, but it can be done. I have seen quite a few legislators change on this subject, but both ways, you know, so it's not like once they voted one way, they're going to always vote that way.
Yes, good point. Thank you.
I always make good points. What can I say? Right? Okay. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. All right. Well, we're hit the, gosh, the 2 hour, it kind of flew by. I like to try to limit things to 2 hours so that people don't go home and say, man, you know, that was really interesting, but it just took too long. If you really are desiring to stay on, I'd be happy to stay on with you though. But, you know, I don't want you to feel like, boy, I just kind of worry out tonight. Glad y'all think it is very interesting from my perspective as well.
Yes, I'd just like to say I'm going to sign off. I got a lot of very valuable information, and Senator Johnson, I will be in touch. I would like to know, so please keep my information. If you have another evening like this, because all the questions and stuff, and to hear it over in different ways really, really helps. But I'm going to get on the website too for the JBS and check some things out there. So once again, thank you so much, because this is so very important, and kind of puts a lot of other things other than the issue of life at a lower spot. So thank you to everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Representative.
Well, I look forward to speaking with you in the future, Glenn. It's been very, very nice meeting you tonight. Susie and Mark, everyone else was quiet. Eldon, I've known for a long time, maybe too long, but it's good to see you as well. So I'm going to sign off too.
I'm the one you can blame for getting into this, I think. So all the grief you've had from these various groups, but
it's a badge of honor at this point.
Yep. There you go.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Great to meet you too. Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
So Eldon,
Is Susie?
I don't see your face anymore.
You don't see my face?
Oh, there
Okay.
you are. There
Okay.
you are. Yeah.
There we go.
So I would just have a quick question before we signed off as well.
Okay.
About approaching, you know, I can do some research about, you know, who's voted for what, if I would know, you know, what, I guess I could look things up by title in the my brain doesn't work so fast anymore. In the register, you know, look up by title. I wouldn't have no idea what bill numbers they were, or anything like that. But as far as contacting a legislator, would we go for a state senator, or would we go for something more local, like, you know, local House or Senate, or what do you do first?
You could do either one. This last session, see the process as these go, these resolutions would first be considered in a committee. So your first battle is to try to get something passed, is, you know, after you get it introduced, is to get it past the committee onto the full House or full Senate. In the past in Utah, it's gone to the either the Senate or the House Government Operations Committee. Now, it's not always. Sometimes it's Judiciary Committee, but from what I've seen, usually these will go to the Government Operations Committee. And from what I've seen, the House seems to provide more opportunity, at least this last session, for who's on there and how they voted in the past. So sometimes you got to look at that and kind of see what your odds are. It's a little difficult this year though, because of course we're having the primaries in Utah in a couple weeks, or next week, right? Something, not very long. And then the general election, and some districts are competitive in the general. But the committee assignments aren't till after November election. So you really don't know who's going to be on it. Although usually some of the same people that have been in the past, if they are reelected, they're going to be on that same committee in the next session, the next 2 years. So that's a difficulty. But I would say at this point, this time of year between sessions and during campaign season, really, maybe not right before the election, but just between sessions generally, people are actually very receptive to talking about this, especially if they're running to be a new state legislator, because they often don't know much about it, and they don't want to be caught flat-footed if somebody says, hey, what's your position on this particular thing? Should we have a convention? And if they say, yeah, I never really heard of that. What is that? Well, if it's somebody pushing for a convention, say, well, I'd be happy to provide you some information about that. And usually how it works is whoever gets to them first is going to have the leg up on persuading them to their side of the issue, whatever it is. So you want to look for those opportunities, see who's running.
Stop playing with her. I can't focus.
So,
oh, I'm sorry. Marital issues here. Petting the dog's pushing everything, falling. Okay, sorry. My mic was open. Thank you for laughing, because otherwise I wouldn't have known my mic was open.
Yeah, your mic was on.
All right, caught in the act.
Yeah, I testified one time on this issue in a committee, and right at the end, our daughter comes in, Daddy. So that was kind of fun. It was on Zoom, but
yeah, I think that's a little bit more innocent than what I did. But anyway, my apologies.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah. So I guess one step would be looking at who was on the committee, and then seeing if they're up for re-election or whatever. Well, we have Mike Lee, of course, and
he's not state.
Oh, he's not state. Oh, right. Duh, forget it. He's not state.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to approach federal officers on the subject. Sometimes they can be persuasive if they support your cause and they want to come to the legislature to testify. Boy, everybody in the legislature knows who Mike Lee is, right? If you would say, hey, this is not a good idea. His dad was against a convention. I think Mike Lee has been on both sides of the issue. But so far as the federal or maybe the governor, they're often influential, but of course they're not the decision makers ultimately on whether the state applies for a convention or rescinds an application or anything like that. But they can hold some weight. Right.
Well, we'd love to learn more about this somehow, and we don't. I guess at this point we wouldn't understand how much weight is being given it if it is an application on the books, like how scary is, it's probably not a good thing, but.
Well, they said that it was an open-ended one that's on the books now.
Oh, an open-ended one is on the books now?
There's two of them. Yeah, the balanced budget amendment language one from 2015, and then the Convention of States project one, which is basically open-ended in disguise.
So the Liberty Group down in Provo, I've seen emails from her, being against it and being for it. So I don't know if I got confused on that or what's their position.
I'm not sure which group, the Liberty Forum or
Anderson, somebody.
Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon. Yeah.
Well, Sharon's against it, I know.
Oh,
She was
okay.
on tonight, but yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
she-
just everybody at the Liberty Forum is very much against the CON in any shape.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Diane.
Mhm.
So I got a lot of first names, not a whole lot of last names, so I don't necessarily know. who
Okay,
everybody is.
well.
Should join the JBS so we can get in touch with people.
Okay, well, my husband just said we should join the JBS to get in touch with people better. So,
I like
yeah.
that idea, of course.
Yeah. So nobody's stealing your mailing lists and harassing us, but I guess,
No.
the more vocal and out there you get, you're putting yourself, in position. We're the only ones on the block or on many of our local blocks that have an American flag out. So
We're in Salt Lake City.
yeah,
Very liberal.
we're in Sugar House area. So
Oh, okay.
we don't have, we have one friendly neighbor, maybe 5 or 6 blocks away. Yeah. So, of similar political focus. So, we are largely hated here. So anyway, goes with the territory when you put an American flag out in a liberal neighborhood.
Right. Yeah, you start to notice that it's you feel like you're in the minority.
Yeah, well, we just keep carrying on, proud and true, carrying on. So what we'll do, we'll go on the website and we'll connect with you that way, and we'll just learn as we go. We'll learn more and more.
Okay. Yeah.
By the way, one other question. I saw, I don't know if your brain can scare this up, but I saw a TED talk many years ago by a female presenter, and she was, it was all about the power of the states. And that was the best explanation of state power that I've ever heard. And if you can figure out who that was, and I can get that information, I just don't know how to look it up. I don't have it on file anymore. And it's a really great talk to share with people.
Okay, I might be able to find it if maybe you want to send me a little email or something. Just
Sure.
yeah.
I'll send you an email reminder, and it was in like maybe 2 parts or 3 parts, and wow, my mouth was hanging open. It was so accurate and so amazing and so well presented, and it just was crazy good. So I will send you an email, and everybody who's still, oh, Carrie Ann is here. Hey. Is that the Carrie Ann? I think it is.
We'll see.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if she's able to type in the chat or something. I don't know.
I'll email her and ask her. I forgot her last name, but she's in the legislature, and I think. And
Oh, okay.
if that's the same one, I'll email her and say, "Hey, was that you?" Okay, so everybody else, sorry I chatted on for too long, and have a good evening, and beat the heat and all that, and let's keep America free.
Thank you so much, Susie and Mark and Diane and Carrie Ann and Marlene. It's great to have you all on. And yeah, it's fun. Hopefully we could do it again. I'll be speaking in July. I'm going to pare this down. They're giving me 40 minutes to try to cover the same stuff. So obviously I'm going to have to cut it down. Give some of the highlights of this presentation in Provo at the Liberty Forum. So looking
That's
forward to
great
that.
to know. That's great to know. You said that originally that you were going to record it tonight so that it could be re-aired or we could share
Yep.
it.
Yep.
How will we find that information?
I will send out a link. If you send me an email, that is helpful. So you know, specifically, I get a little thing that says, "Hey, don't forget to send me a link." You know, that'll be helpful too.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet.
Hey, we're signing off, so have a good
All
night,
right.
everybody, and thanks for this presentation. It was really, really good.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Susie, Mark. All right. All right. Unless somebody has something else, I guess I'll sign off.